Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 4:07 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, retired three-star General Keith Kellogg will be with us. He's also the co-chair of the Center for American Security at the America First Policy Institute. We'll talk about Governor Tim Walz, stolen valor, and all of the scandals now coming out about Kamala Harris's running mate. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. On that front, what you have in the last 24 hours is JD Vance has come out and said, yeah, stolen valor, Tim Walz is guilty of this. Tim Walz is guilty of this, of inflating his record, inflating his rank, and he says, I think that's shameful. And, in fact, abandoning his unit ahead of the Iraq War, which he expected to have to be deployed to. Here's JD Vance explaining.
When the United States Marine Corps, when the United States of America asked me to go to Iraq to serve my country, I did it. I did what they asked me to do it, and I did it honorably, and I'm very proud of that service. When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. I think it's shameful.
He says, I think that's shameful, what he did. Now the reaction is coming in to JD Vance saying that. Among the people reacting, Adam Kinzinger saying the following, crying Adam Kinzinger, tweeting out this. Okay, JD served honorably, but he wasn't kicking down doors. He was in public affairs, which is, again, fine and honorable. Tim, after he was eligible for retirement, retired. People do that, says Adam Kinzinger in defense of Tim Walz's lies. Additionally, CNN's Breonna Keeler is out now with a new statement on CNN claiming that, well, JD Vance didn't really do much when he was overseas. He was just like a public affairs guy.
I also think that JD Vance, as a messenger on this, may be an imperfect messenger, because we have, as you introduced him, as a combat correspondent, which was what his title was. But when you dig a little deeper into that, he was a public affairs specialist, someone who did not see combat, which certainly the title combat correspondent kind of gives you a different impression. So he may be the imperfect messenger on that.
Oh, yeah, so he's lying is what CNN's Breonna Keeler says. For more on this, I want to bring in a guy who knows all about this subject. Geoff Ingersol is here. He's the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller and a United States Marine Corps combat correspondent. Served 2 tours in Iraq, including in 2006. That's the year J.D. Vance was there. Hey, Geoff, great to have you on the show, sir.
Hey, what's going on, Vince?
I'm doing well. Jeff, I know that you've been tracking all of this today. What do you make of this move by Adam Kinzinger and Breonna Keeler to say, well, that's nothing. J.D. Vance was just a public affairs guy.
Well, obviously, I find it wildly dishonest for a lot of reasons. I mean, first and foremost, I did J.D. Vance's job. I was there. I went through the schoolhouse, the same schoolhouse, exactly a year after him. I deployed exactly a year after him. And it's funny because when I got to the schoolhouse, they had this wall called the Wall of Heroes, all the combat correspondents who had done, valor, who were awarded for valor in combat. And my senior enlisted commander there had an award on the wall, and I'm quoting, it literally said, Sergeant Milks fired his shotgun at point-blank range into the enemy. Now, does that sound like a guy who just writes press releases?
No.
I don't think so. And so, I graduated from there. I got stationed in Pendleton. I was enlisted just like Vance. You don't get to choose where you go. You don't get to choose when you go. And we all deployed to Iraq in 2006. And when we got back in 2007, I would say half of my cohort, now these are enlisted guys, they're very young guys, 25 and under, about half of my cohort had direct combat experience. And when I looked at Vance's, where he served, he was in between Al-Assad and Al-Tain, Iraq. And I'm very familiar with both of those places. He was there in 2005. I would say the fat part of the bat for the insurgency was 2004 to 2007-ish. And there's only 2 ways to get in between those bases, either in the air or on the ground, and neither one of them is riskless. So I really take umbrage to this, especially from Kinzinger, who should know better. And I'm not going to denigrate his service, But when I hear stuff like this from a guy who served, I find it really disgusting, Vince. And, I kind of give it to Kyler. And, there was another one, Mehdi Hassan, is kind of saying the same thing. Oh, he was just a press black. And it's just complete hogwash. If you were an enlisted guy and you deployed, you were part of a unit, and you behaved no different than the guys in that unit. You just had a camera strapped to you. So it's here on the show. I want to do a couple things. A good buddy of mine, Sergeant Agostini, he's in Chicago now. He listed out a couple of names. I want to read a couple of names.
Yeah.
Major Megan McClung, she was in my job field. She was killed in action. She was in one of my units. Lance Corporal Ralph Fabry, he was killed in action. Corporal William Salazar, he was killed in action. Aaron Mencken, wounded in action. Dorian Gardner, wounded in action. Eugenio Montañez, wounded in action. And this is hardly a comprehensive list, but these are all people who clearly were not wounded by sitting at a desk writing press releases. So these three people, and I mean Mehdi Hassan and brainless Kylar and that garden gnome Adam Kinzinger, these three people should be ashamed of themselves. And I have a little challenge for them. If any of them can out-hike me in any terrain, anywhere, at any time, I'll donate $10,000 to the veteran organization of their choice. So I hope they hear this, and I hope they take me up on the challenge.
Yeah, I'd love to see Adam Kinzinger try. I'd love to see him try. I know who's winning that hike.
You'd see him cry. He'd be crying.
Hey,
he's like a garden gnome come to life with those wee little legs. It's like Geppetto's garden gnome. Adam Kinzinger.
Hey, so Geoff Ingersol, give me more details. You talked about some of the great veterans, the people who were killed in action doing this job, covering the events on the front lines, carrying both a rifle and a camera. Give me more of a sense of what it means to be a combat correspondent. What are these guys seeing on a day-by-day basis, especially at that time frame, 2005, 2006 in Iraq?
Yeah, it depends on what unit they're tasked with. But, I was with the MLG the first time around. I was with IMF the second time around. There were times I was, covering the trauma hospitals, which are on base. And that was some of the gnarliest stuff I've ever seen. And I spent time with the grunts. I mean, I went on patrols with the grunts. And even as a civilian, when I embedded in Afghanistan, I saw direct combat, and nothing prepared me for the stuff that I saw in those trauma rooms. It was truly, truly harrowing stuff. And you have to keep your cool, and you have to document it. You are there first and foremost to document. Now, if you're carrying around a rifle and you're with a rifle company, or you're with a transition team, or you're with a mounted company, you're going to fall in with them and do the job that they do. But your primary job is to capture the truth of what they're going through and disseminate it out to the public. And so if the choice is between dying or getting a photo, like, you're going to return fire. And a lot of people I served with, and I'm not going to call them out, but a lot of my very close friends actually did do that, did engage the enemy directly as part of an infantry unit. But they're also taking photographs, and they're making sure that the things that those guys did out there are never forgotten. And oftentimes documenting, and this is sad to say, but it's true, and I've seen it, documenting the final moments or the final bits of heroism that these fine young men have demonstrated for their country.
You mentioned United States Marine Corps Major Megan McClung, whose bio I was reading up on today. She passed away in 2006, killed in action. She had a really impressive resume. She was the first female Marine officer to be killed in Operation Iraqi Freedom. She was the first female graduate of the United States Naval Academy to be killed in action since the school had been founded in 1845. She was 34 at the time of her death. She served as a media relations officer, and she was killed by a roadside bomb instantly near Ramadi, Iraq, December 6, 2006. She was a part of a convoy that was escorting Newsweek journalists. In other words, she was leading other sort of mainstream media reporters The Newsweek journalists were in another vehicle. They escaped without injury. McClung had been escorting retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Ollie North and a Fox News Channel camera crew earlier that day, who were, of course, devastated when they learned the news of the attack. So, in other words, you get the CNN lady, Breonna Keeler, coming out and going, what is JD Vance doing in this job? Well, it turns out the types of people who did JD Vance's job were the ones who were trying to help escort corporate media journalists through safely in these very fraught war zones.
Isn't that funny? And it's truly tragic. I mean, I knew Megan. I wasn't very close with her. My senior enlisted leader was very close with her. We got notified immediately. She was killed in Ramadi. We saw the Humvee. It was it was unrecognizable. And it was a really trying time for the entire public affairs unit that was out there at the time. And, I mean, that's a really good point that you raised, and I've done a lot of that myself. Transfer public affairs or transfer media reporters around bases. In fact, when I embedded with the Marines in Afghanistan, they had a public affairs Marine with me. So, yes, that's exactly what she was doing. She was arranging travel for mainstream journalists, keeping them safe and security, and she was killed in action, unfortunately. And what's interesting about Megan McClung is that, like Walz, she was a reservist, and she activated to go. So she answered the call as a reservist and went. And, I don't want to get into Walz. I don't want to ruin the rest of your show. I had a lot to say about him as well. I just find it particularly disgusting that these media people carrying water for Walz are denigrating a crop of people with a rich history of bravery and sacrifice. We were on the first images that came out at Iwo Jima came from guys who did my job and JD's job. So it's really, I find it really disappointing, and it's disingenuous, and it's bankrupt. It's intellectually bankrupt. And again, if that woman-shaped marshmallow, brainless Kyler, or that garden gnome with his wee little legs, Adam Kinzinger, want to own up, they can challenge me to a hike, and we'll see how far they get.
Yeah, all right. Well, yet another reason I'm so glad to call you a friend and a drinking buddy. Geoff Ingersol, editor-in-chief over at the Daily Caller and United States Marine. Sir, thank you very much. Very appreciative of you today, buddy.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go to the phones. Right now I've got Rich calling in from South Carolina, line 3. Rich, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Thanks for taking my call, Vince.
Yes, sir.
I had to call you when you brought up Keeler and Kissling?
Crying Adam Kinzinger, the lawn gnome?
Yeah, the lawn gnome. Like I said, my son joined the Marines in 2004, similar to what JD Vance did. Mm-hmm. He went in as a rifleman, became a part of security force, and was stationed at the White House in the Presidential Support Detail for a while.
Wow.
He got sick of that, so he requested to get put over in Iraq. And what he was telling me is, when you're in a war zone, no matter whether you're with the band or whatever your MOS is, you got to pick up a gun and shoot it because people are shooting back at you.
Yeah.
So whatever Kissinger, and these people should realize this, what Vance did, he had the guts to at least enlist and go into a war zone.
Right.
What the heck did Walz do? He quit.
Yeah, and it's not like the enemy's looking and going, "Oh, that's the chaplain. Don't shoot him." Like, I don't think that's the posture they're taking.
Well, just think about this. He told me the whole country is a war zone. It doesn't matter what you're doing over there. You better protect yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, these people are sick. They're deranged, and these people should pick up a gun, get over into a combat zone, and see what it's really like instead of harping about what they don't know anything about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's what they're doing. Thank you, Rich.
So I
appreciate
you
that.
taking my call, but this stuff has to end, Vince.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and thank you for your son's service. That's a big deal. All right, let me go to Ben now, who's calling in from Frederick on line 5. Ben, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, Ben. The line is active. I can hear it. You there with me, Ben? Okay. No Ben. That's okay.
Okay, I got you.
Oh, there's Ben. Hey, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I'm a combat veteran, served in Iraq, 2004, 2005.
Thank you for that.
What's really interesting, well, two things. First of all, they said that he got out, he retired before he got active duty orders.
Walz,
There's a warning order that comes way before, because I deployed. We got the warning order in March. We didn't get activated until June. Also, the other thing I wanted to mention is it's kind of a disservice to all the sergeant majors out there when this guy's calling himself sergeant major and he didn't complete the sergeant major's academy.
He didn't fulfill the requirements, in order to maintain the rank. So he was demoted back down to master sergeant.
Yeah, so he didn't technically hold the rank of sergeant major.
He didn't retire as one. I guess nominally he was being referred to it for a time, but he didn't fulfill the requirements, so they reverted his rank down.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have pinned on the rank of sergeant major.
This is what the reporting is. This is what the reporting is. Politico says that he did serve as a command sergeant major, but he was reverted back to the rank of master sergeant when he left the military because he had not completed required coursework for the higher rank with the U.S. Army Sergeants Major Academy. And he's been running around telling people he's a retired sergeant major, command sergeant major, which is not true.
Yeah, he would have retired as an E8, not an E9. He wouldn't have gotten E9 until he finished the Sergeant Major's Academy.
Yeah. Well, he's been telling a lot of lies about this. Thank you for the call here. This is a big deal, and that's why we're going to chat coming up next with retired 3-star General Keith Kellogg. He is not at all happy about the way Tim Walz has been lying to the public about his military service. We'll get into that next. Stay with me right here on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 4:35 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Kamala Harris now running with the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. And all sorts of information is now coming out to a national audience that was well known before in his runs in Minnesota. And that includes that Tim Walz apparently became aware that his unit was deploying to Iraq. And before that happened, he got out of the military. And now it's become a big political liability for him this week. Here he is dodging another conflict as reporters were shouting to him this week about the accusations of stolen valor. Take a listen. Governor, JD Vance has accused you of stolen valor. How do you respond? Multiple questions to that effect. No answers as Tim Walz smiles and walks away from reporters, pretends that he can't hear them. For more on this saga and what it all really means, I want to bring in retired 3-star Army General Keith Kellogg. He's also the co-chair of the Center for American Security at the America First Policy Institute. General Kellogg, always good to have you on the show. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Vance. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you today.
Let's talk about Tim Walz. This is one of those things that I come from a military family. My dad's a Marine. My brother's a Marine. I've got tons of cousins and uncles that are military service members. But as you get into the details here, sometimes it gets a little hard for a civilian like me to navigate it. Give me a sense of what you think Tim Walz is guilty of here.
Yeah, look, Vince, this is personal for me because I've been through this long ago. And I fought in the Vietnam War, a couple of tours there as a combat infantryman and special forces officer. I came back, and it was a pretty divisive time in the United States of America. And after the war ended, a lot of people started coming in line saying, "Oh, I served, I did this," like it was truly stolen valor. I mean, there were people like there was a current senator, Blumenthal, who did that, and then you had an actor named Brian Dennehy did it. And a lot of people kind of said, "Well, I was there and I did it." No, that's basically you're taking the valor and the efforts of people who had gone before you. And sometimes I go over to the Vietnam Wall and I look at it, and it's wonderful, and because the onyx on there reflects you. There are 58,318 names on that wall. And those of us that came out of the war kind of made a promise to them, because there are names, there are people on that wall that I led, that died under my command, under my leadership, even as a junior officer. You know, people that I held when they died and wept when they died. And so I said, I kind of gave them a promise that I would make sure that this kind of stuff didn't happen again. So fast forward to today. You fast forward today, and you've got a governor, Governor Walz of Minnesota, who says he did certain things, and he actually didn't. And now I'm kind of saying, look, I have a daughter who served in combat in Afghanistan. I have a younger son who served in combat as a platoon leader in the 82nd Airborne Division in Afghanistan in combat. My son-in-law fought in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and I owe it to them to make sure that people get called out. And what has happened is you have somebody like Governor Walz who said, in his own words, he has said he's done certain things. He said he talked about a quote that he said, talked about weapons of war, that I quote, I carried in war. No, he didn't. Or then he said another thing, as a congressman, he was in a public display, and some, you know, it's a public record. He said, I am retired Command Sergeant Major. No, you're not. You're retired Master Sergeant. And so you get things like that, and it comes down to integrity of the person, integrity of what is actually happening. And that's what I'm talking about when you talk about stolen valor. Don't be something or say something you're not. You know, JD Vance, to his credit, JD Vance was a Marine. He served in combat. And people forget that people died as you know, journalists. Over 20 journalists died in war. There was at least one public affairs specialist, a guy that happened to be named James Hunter, was a U.S. military public affairs officer killed in Afghanistan. So this is one of those, he did something that Walz didn't, and then he's trying to hide from it. It's all public record. There's the receipts. There's people out there who may not like it, but that's the way it is.
Give me a sense of, I want to break down some of the elements of this. So Tim Walz has claimed, apparently on multiple occasions, that he's a retired command sergeant major. As you point out, that is a lie. He is retired at the rank of master sergeant. There's a claim that he served for a short time as a command sergeant major, but he failed to ultimately fulfill the requirements of that rank, and then was, some media say, reverted back. That sounds like a demotion to me. Can you filter through what all of that means?
Sure, it's quite simple. He said, quote, I am retired command sergeant major. No, you are not. You are retired master sergeant. If you don't fulfill the requirements of the duty, then you are reduced in rank. Look, I'll give you an example, a general officer rank. General officer, you are allowed to retire, approved by Congress, at a certain level. For example, at a 3-star, you retire as a 3-star if you were serving 3-star. But if you don't fulfill the requirements of the 3-star position in a reasonable amount of time that they want you to be in that position, then you revert to 2 stars. The same back to 1 stars as well. That happens in all the services. Just be honest with what you are. You know, I'll give you a good example. He's a wonderful officer. David Grange Jr. commanded the 1st Infantry Division as a major general. He left the Army because he didn't serve the requirements to get to general officer, retired as a brigadier general. Okay, he's a retired brigadier general. Served as a major general, didn't fulfill the requirements, came back. And I love Dave Grange. I served under his father. But I'm just telling you, they're examples. Have integrity. Say, this is really what happened. It doesn't hurt to say that. Just be honest with it. But the one that really gets me is the fact when he made a comment, when he was talking about weapons of war, he said about the weapons, quote, this is a quote, that I carried in war. No, you didn't. And you imply something you are not. And that's what I'm talking about. And it comes down to one simple word that in the military is critical in leadership positions, and the word is called integrity. Your dad knows that as a retired general officer, okay? And that's where I'm coming from, and that's the reason I'm calling him out. I'm not going to go there. I wouldn't let anybody go there with that.
Let me play the audio you're referencing. This was posted by the Kamala Harris campaign. They were proud of this clip, but they're featuring a bald-faced lie from Tim Walz. Take a listen to this audio.
Hope woke up like many of you did 5 weeks ago and said, Dad, you're the only person I know who's in elected office. You need to stop what's happening with this. I'll take my kick in the butt for the NRA. I spent 25 years in the Army, and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
There's a whole bunch of reasons why that's pernicious audio. The lie is the big one. But another one here, General Kellogg, is that he's using that lie in the service of disarming Americans. It doesn't really get much more contemptible than that.
Yeah, look, I'm with you completely on that one. Look, where I'm coming from, this is an individual. When you look at that ticket, Kamala Harris made the comment, and she's absolutely correct. This is a huge choice. The choice of where this country is, where it should go, have two governing philosophies. The choice could not be more clear to Americans. And they need to sit down really hard, I believe, Vince, and really think hard about this. Where do you want this country to go? Where do you want it to go for your sons and your daughters and your grandchildren as well? I know where I want it to go, and it's not with them. And for somebody who makes comments like that, I get very, very concerned about what other comments he'd make, and the comments he'd make to the American people, in fact, lie about it. Look, if he did, it's easy for him to say, I didn't do it. I didn't go to war. Those are not weapons that I carry in war. I'm a retired master sergeant. By the way, there's nothing wrong in life about being a retired master sergeant. Nothing. And I don't know why he did it.
Now, one of the things that stands out here, too, is that he was in a position of leadership. It's a big deal to be a master sergeant, of course, and a command sergeant major is what he wanted to be but failed to meet the requirements for. What we're finding out now is that in 2005, as his unit was about to deploy to Iraq, that he had some sense that this was coming, that a deployment was coming up, and it was at that moment he decided, okay, I'm getting out. And this has led a number of people who served in that unit to have a lot of contempt for him, saying they were left holding the bag, and he jumped out before that deployment. What do you make of this? How does this work, first and foremost, in terms of your ability to get advanced knowledge of a deployment? And what does it tell you if he's given advanced knowledge that a deployment to Iraq is coming and he bails on his unit?
Well, I listened to the soldiers, Vince. I mean, the soldiers just told the story right there that they don't trust him. They don't believe he was a true leader, and that he ducked when they were actually going to a tough combat zone. They weren't going to Italy or they weren't going to Germany. They were going into combat. That he basically said, no, I've got better things to do. That's another part of integrity, the fact that he saw it was not selfless service. It was all in for himself. And the soldiers saw that. And that's the reason why you're seeing these former non-commissioned officers coming out, former soldiers, the mother of a young man that was killed from his unit when it deployed into combat. That's why they're saying this. And it just shows the character of the man. Here's what I've said. I'm going to do a huge intellectual shift for you right now. When President Trump was nearly assassinated recently, when he stood up and said, fight, 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 I said, I know I've been shot at in combat. And something about that makes you really realize who you are and what you are. It really shows the mark of a man or a woman who's been involved in that. And it really shows true colors. I believe Donald J. Trump showed true colors that day when he stood up, blood on his face, and said, fight, fight, fight. I think Walz showed true colors on himself when he said, I think I'll do this. I won't deploy with these men and women that he had led for years. He basically abandoned them in the fight, in the face of a fight. And I think that's, to me, on a personal level and professional level, that's actually disgraceful.
What is the role, General Kellogg, of a senior non-commissioned officer? How important is that job in the United States military, and what kind of role model are they supposed to serve to the troops who follow them?
Yeah, I'm sure your dad would say the same thing I just said, because he's a Marine general. I know he thinks the same way I probably do. Non-commissioned officers, senior non-commissioned officers actually run the units. They do. I mean, I used to always kind of laugh about it. I said, hey, I used to tell the officers in the units, and when I was in the 82nd, I said, guys, we're Christmas help. The guys that are really around here full time are your senior non-commissioned officers, because they are the glue of the organization. So that's the fabric that stays there, because they don't come and go like officers do. They come for a year, 2 years, 3 years. The non-commissioned officers stay there 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So they develop a bond, a trust within the organization, and you expect that trust to continue into a combat zone. I never, by the way, in all the units I've commanded, to include the Army's 82nd Airborne Division, I never had an NCO terminate before they went on a combat mission. Never. In fact, it was usually just the opposite. They were willing to kick down the door, and threaten everybody unless they went with them. So it was just the opposite. It's kind of the opposite view of life that I came from, and the view of the military that I came from out there. Look, I'm going to brag on her, okay? My wife deployed to Grenada. She didn't have to do that, but she was one of those who volunteered in the Operation Just Cause, a young officer, happened to be an AG officer, but she was willing to deploy. She kind of kicked down the door to go to an organization that didn't want women at that time in the military, didn't want women in combat. So, her, my daughter who served in combat, as I said before, my son-in-law who served both Afghanistan and Iraq, and my youngest son who served in Afghanistan as a platoon leader of the 82nd Airborne Division. So it's something I wouldn't expect from a non-commissioned officer or an officer as well. You go where you're sent to. You go to there's a term I used to always use. I'd always admire men and women who would move to the sound of guns. And that is the role you are in the military. That is what you should do. When the guns sound, that's where you should be. And as leaders, you should be right in front of them, leading them.
Man, your whole family, sir? What's in the drinking water at the Kellogg household? That's what a great story. You guys are just unbelievable. I always appreciate our conversations, sir, and really, really appreciate your insight today. Thank you, General Kellogg. Good to talk to you. All right, a lot of phone calls coming in, as usual. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Let's go to line 2. That's where we find Alan calling in from Gambrills today. Alan, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, Vince. So good to have you back. Corey did a fantastic job, but I just wanted to make two hopefully brief points. I will be completely honest. I wasn't very familiar with the senator or the governor until very recently to actually drill down. One of the things that I discovered was I deployed in support of, not a Marine, former Navy guy, in support of the Marines in Anbar Province during the surge. And I will say that one of the things, two things that I actually discovered was, one, I definitely picked the right branch of service because the Marines, they're a different breed. And two, it's because they are absolutely positively the best in the world at what they do. And one of the things that is fantastic about them is every single Marine is an infantryman first.
A rifleman, every Marine. Yeah, that's right.
Is a rifleman. And I don't care what, and you have that background, but something that I discovered that was fantastic. And so the service that JD Vance offered was fantastic. The second thing that I am taking umbrage with right now is being career military with the governor, who is he's sidestep. He's not Waltz. He's not a Waltz. He's a sidestep. But he is. I mean, let's be honest. He's sidestep.
Yes.
But there is, in the military, there's a tremendous difference, whether it's Army, Navy, or in the various branches of service.
Right.
Between an E9, who is a sergeant major, or an E9. With the Navy, there's a difference between a master chief, a command master chief, and an E9. Now, it seems that it's interesting that Sidestep won't release his DD-214 to see where he actually fell out in that. But I will say after 30 years of uniform services, I know the difference between an E9 and a master chief. I know the difference between an E9 and a sergeant major, and especially a command sergeant major. And I will say that the nonsense that's being put out by Sidestep, again, not Waltz, because he's not that coordinated, is a totally different thing.
Yeah.
He, I'm just saying there's a huge difference, and anybody that has ever worn the cloth will be able to tell you very quickly the difference between in Sidestep's instance, the difference between an E8 and a master sergeant. There's a huge difference, and it's becoming readily apparent.
Yeah, I think it is, Alan. Alan, thank you very much for the call. I really appreciate it, and and you're right about that. I think a lot of people who've worn that uniform are very aware of what's going on here. In fact, they're all calling right now. We may take some of those calls next. And then I've got an update for you on the events of July 13th, the assassination attempt on President Trump. What were the local cops thinking as it all went down? Well, we've got audio of what they actually said that very day. That's coming up in the next hour. Stay with us.